welcome to the channel. Today we will be discussing uh, Scrum, and in particular we'll be discussing the poker sessions. How to do a poker session. Now, poker sessions, no, don't get me wrong, this is not the crazy poker sessions and it's not all stressful. It's actually a scientific exercise. So let's get going and understand how to do a poker sessions for scrums. The first thing we need to understand today is point estimation. Every user story that comprises a part of the sprint needs to have a point. Now, this explains how many points a story should be assigned to. Now, typically, there will be stories that are larger, that are smaller, that are medium sized, and some that are extra large. And in my experience, there are companies that will do points as 2 points, 4 points, 8 points, 16 points, and that's kind of like a simplistic way of looking at it. Then a more scientific way is to look at the Fibonacci series, where each increment is really the double of the previous two numbers in the series. So if you have a 2-pointer and you have a 3-pointer, the next in the series would be like a 5-pointer. Similarly, you could have the next one would be an 8-pointer, and then finally you could have a 13-pointer. And that's usually the maximum that I recommend allocating for a story in a sprint. What happens is, if you have too large a story with too many points and you don't get it done for some reason, then your whole sprint is going to get skewed. It's going to impact and look like you didn't accomplish anything. So you do want to try and break down as much as possible a story into smaller points. So with keeping that in mind, I typically recommend, like a 2-pointer, a 3-pointer, a 5-pointer, an 8-pointer, and on an exceptional basis, a 13-pointer. But beyond that, I don't recommend any stories which would be larger than that. And depending on, of course, what the story is itself and what your experience is with those stories in terms of effort, you would pick one of these estimates and apply it to your story. The next is, when you're doing a poker session, ultimately it's planning for a sprint. The sprint is really an estimation of how much you think your team can get done that sprint. How many points, how many stories, right? And how do you do that? It's really an estimation based on several factors. But one of the simple ways to do that is, especially if you've already been up and running, is to look at your history, right? So look at the last 2, 3, 4 sprints and see how many velocity points you have accomplished. Like see here, the sprint 55, sprint 56, sprint 57, sprint 58. You can see this team is averaging maybe 20 to 25 points, somewhere in there. And you can see even then, there is the green is of course what was completed and the gray is what is planned. You can see this team is close enough in terms of planning versus actual. Of course, this last sprint looks like they planned more and they got done maybe 60% of what they planned. There could be some reasons behind it, some urgent issues, like we discussed in the previous episode. There could be unplanned leaves, emergencies, those kinds of issues that pop up. So again, this gives you a ballpark, like say about 20 to 25 points that this team completes each sprint. and you can take that as a guide to plan for the next sprint. Of course, you should adjust. Like I said, there's variables, right? Is it a long weekend coming up? Is it the Christmas time? Is it the end of the year time? Is it a lot of people not feeling well for some reason? There's a flu season or whatever going on, vacations, So those kinds of issues need to be considered. There could be some critical releases being planned, which might take away bandwidth from planned activities. So all of those need to be considered, in the poker session, and where you will identify what's your target for that sprint. Now, say you identify you can do 25 points. So on an average, you can do 5 stories that were 5 pointers, maybe some combination of the two, of maybe a large 1 8 pointer, 2 5 pointers, a bunch of smaller stories, right? So now you kind of know what you can do in your upcoming sprint. Next thing is you need to understand, the requirements of each story. And, here I'm going to talk to you today, uh, not a lot in detail, but I'm just kind of introducing to you, like the whole concept of a story. And, on the right side here, you can see there's an importance box here, there's an estimate box here, and some other like business criteria on why do you need the story. And again, this is not a very detailed discussion on user stories. That will be coming up in my next session again. But for today, I just wanted you to understand that, look at this template, uh, look at what stories are being proposed, try and do a rough estimate, give us some importance. Are they critical? Are they medium priority, high priority? And then, of course, some business reason that will kind of drive the importance. And then also, what is it going to be to make that like a done state, right? Is that something you can complete in one sprint? So again, it was very important to understand those when you're trying to do your poker session. Next, I'm going to show you a sample Jira board here. So you can see here we have the backlog. This is really all your stories that you and your product managers, developers are writing and creating, and putting in your backlog. They could be tech debt items. Those could be new feature delivery items. And then here you have like the future sprints that are going to be planned. So basically, you would create a placeholder sprint. You would add some of the stories from the backlog there, go through the exercise of estimating points, work your way towards, say we had discussed 25 points is what you can do in that sprint. Work your way adding up to 25 points. And basically at that point, you kind of have a rough idea of what your poker session will be able to get into the actual sprint when you fire it up on sprint planning day. So with this, I would like to say we have a rough idea on what our future sprint will look like, and these are the key elements of a poker session that you need to exercise with your team. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining me today. Like I mentioned earlier in the call, in this video, that the next detailed video that I'll be doing is on user story grooming. We'll get into a lot of details around requirement analysis and point estimation. Till then, thank you very much for joining, and do subscribe to our channel.